Aishlin. Welcome to Collection Cut Down. I have put an explanation of what that is in a video that I'll link to either up here or down here. Today's video is 12 Rounds. This is a movie starring John Cena, who is a WWE wrestler, who also does movies. He's done a lot of movies for WWE studios. This movie in particular, I think he's in law enforcement, so this is just from my memory. I think he's a cop. Messes up a bad guy's plan somehow, and in retaliation, the bad guy kidnaps his girlfriend. He has to go on 12 rounds of this puzzle that the bad guy has set for him, where each round has a time limit and he has to solve this puzzle, otherwise his girlfriend will be killed. It's an interesting premise. You don't see it a lot. I'm sure this isn't the first movie to have done it, but it's still entertaining. I'm interested to see it again. I've only seen it the once. Mostly I'm just excited to see the action. Like, the stunts are usually pretty good in WWE Studios films for obvious reasons. They do stunts for a living, so you'd expect that they'd be pretty quality. And the production values are usually pretty good, more so than you might expect. So this movie is directed by Renny Harlin, who directed Die Hard 2, Cliffhanger, and The Long Kiss Goodnight, all of which are in my collection. I usually find him a really good action director, and I don't think that this movie will be any exception. I think he's kind of underrated in that sense. I think that just goes to show that WWE, the studio, invests, you know, money and talent into the films. The films are better for it, and I hope that 12 Rounds holds up to all that praise that I'm giving them. I don't know why I like WWE Studios so much, like the films they make. I suspect it's because you kind of know what you're getting. They also do the Marine series. They've done a few one-offs as well, but yeah, usually they star a wrestler and they've got pretty slick action, decent enough script. It's unusual that you find a studio that has such a clear brand, and I like that. I think that's one of the reasons I like collecting actors, particular actors' filmographies, if they, you know, make a certain type of movie, so I know what I'm getting when I'm going into it. And I think that the same applies for WWE films. I remember the premise a lot better than I remember the actual execution. That'll be interesting for me to watch this again and see if maybe the execution doesn't quite live up to the premise that I like so much. Let's jump into it. So I was pretty right about what this film is about. At the very start of the movie, he is a beat cop who stops a terrorist. The terrorist is played by Aidan Gillen, of Game of Thrones fame. He plays Littlefinger. I had forgotten that. So yeah, he's a beat cop. He stops this guy. In the process, the guy's girlfriend dies. She's played by Taylor Cole, who actually almost entirely does Hallmark movies now. He stops this terrorist. Him and his partner get promoted to detectives, and 1 year later, the terrorist escapes and kidnaps the girlfriend and makes John Cena's detective character do all these tasks in order to win her back. It's an interesting premise, and I think they did it really well. It was actually really entertaining, and I think there's a lot of reasons for this. Partly, I think it was actually quite a decent script. One of the things I liked about the script, it does a good job of establishing all the characters. In the initial sequence when John Cena is a beat cop chasing down the terrorist, they kind of really establish that he's going to be the sort of guy who's going to dive into things like this head first and has both the skills and the drive that then carries over to the second part of the film when he starts having to do these tasks. So I think that was quite clever a good way of establishing, so it doesn't come out of nowhere, which sometimes, you know, these things are. It's nice to establish that element of character first, even if it doesn't quite explain where it comes from. It also does a good job of showing a difference between him and his partner's character. Like, the two of them are very different people. The partner is played by Brian J. Smith, who does a lot of TV work. The partner's like a real player and loves the ladies, and John Cena, he's more monogamous and he's really quite devoted to his girlfriend. When she gets kidnapped, you know that he genuinely would care that that has happened. In the initial kind of stuff with his girlfriend, the two of them were sort of having a bit of difficulties. She was upset with him and was starting not to trust him, and then so that was a nice element that carried through the film. Right at the end, he asks, "Do you trust me?" before they do this big thing, and she's like, "Yeah, I trust you." I don't think it necessarily solved their domestic problems, but it did kind of add a bit of poignancy to it, which I enjoyed. One thing about her character, though, that I wasn't a fan of, so in my review of 6 Bullets, I talked about how I quite enjoyed the fact that the female characters, particularly the mum and the daughter, both had roles in the saving of the daughter. Like, she helped save herself, and the mum had things to do to help with that too. This film was not as successful in writing the female character. I think that was really its major downfall. So she doesn't really do anything to help save herself. I mean, they kind of tried to make it look like she did, but it doesn't do anything to actually change the outcome of what happens, which is really the definition of agency. So you want characters who affect the outcome, and if they weren't there, that the plot would be different, whereas that's not the case in this. For female characters, there's this thing called the sexy lamp test, and if you don't know what that is, it basically means that if you can replace your female character with a sexy lamp and nothing changes, then it's probably not great for women in terms of representation, and unfortunately this film does not pass the sexy lamp test. There's a lot of other things going for it. I think John Cena in particular is quite a strong lead. He seems like he's a decent, charming guy. He does a lot for Make-A-Wish and things like that. So I think that's a strength of the film that shines through, because you want this guy that he plays to be really decent in the featurette. And Renny Harlem specifically said that he didn't want the classic action hero of the oiled up muscles and, all that big power fantasy stuff going on that you often see with Schwarzenegger, Commando being the classic example. This is a really big, muscly guy, and they easily could have, played into that. And instead they downplayed it and made him seem more normal and, didn't gloss it up for the camera, and I really appreciated that. I think it grounded it a little bit in ways that you wouldn't necessarily expect. I've already talked a little bit about Renny Harlin, but I really wanted to give him props for this film. I actually think he's a really good director. Specifically, I wanted to compare it a little bit to 7 Seconds, which I reviewed, and I gave the director there a bit of a hard time on the fact that some of the action sequences were a little bit confusing, in particularly the car chases where you couldn't quite place where everything was in relation to each other. And I think that that's the mark of a good director, and in this it's the perfect example. One sequence where John Cena's character is he's about to rappel down the side of a building because he doesn't have time to take the normal way out. And there's like these big rolls of cable, and he just picks one up and chucks it out the window. And just a simple thing, but when the cable runs out and the big roll that it's on falls, and it falls in the place where John Cena will be hanging over a few minutes later, and it smashes. And it's things like that that really make you understand the danger of what the character is about to go through. And I think slight touches like that can really sort of elevate a film and make it, you know, better. And less confusing, particularly in action sequences. So it's just context clues like that I think really help ground an action sequence in a way that the viewer can kind of understand both what's happening and the danger that it poses to the character. And so it's smart choices like that that really make this film quite a bit better than some other films in this kind of genre. They do quite a lot of practical stunts. If you're gonna do an action movie, unless it's a big superhero movie or something, I genuinely think that practical stunts are the way to go. And casting somebody who's kind of like an athlete with John Cena, who's used to that sort of physical work, is smart. That's a real bonus when you want that kind of visceral thrill. I wouldn't go so far as to say this was a perfect movie. There was some flaws. I think as good as Aidan Gillen was in the movie as a villain, it seems to be his kind of thing. He's good at that. But I'm not quite sure why they had him do an American accent, because it wasn't particularly consistent. A lot of Irish came through in it, and it was a little bit distracting. So I think if they wanted to cast him, there was no reason that the character had to be American at all. So I would have just gone with his normal accent. The other thing is there's a couple of moments that are a bit silly. So I mentioned the bit where John Cena is rappelling down the side of a building. Well, to get up there, they think it's a fire and he goes in with the fire crew. Like, I know he's a detective, but that's not really the same thing. You can't just grab a jacket and go. Even if they're like, they know that he's in the midst of this 12-round situation, you know, I still don't think that literally everyone on that crew is going to be like, yeah, sure, go into the fire, we don't care. It seems a little bit unlikely. If that's the worst that the film has to offer, yeah, I think that's fine. Overall, what did I think of the film? Well, personally, I think this is quite a keeper. I don't know how other people feel about it, but in terms of like slick action movies, it's right up there. I would recommend this if you're in the mood for that, and it's definitely staying on my keeper shelf for now. So that means that the next video is going to be number 2 in the series. I don't remember this one as well as the first one, so I'm really interested to see what I think about it. And Renny Harlin doesn't direct this one, so it's going to be interesting to compare that and see whether the film suffers under a different director or whether they do an equally good job, and different actor, obviously. Otherwise, goodbye for now and happy watching.